And welcome back to Love Your Food. What do you do if you have some leftover dessert? So a few weeks ago, we made those beautiful blondies, but we made far too many. And we ended up with a bunch of leftovers, and they got a little bit stale. So what we ended up doing is making this bread pudding out of them. And you can do this with a lot of different kinds of desserts. And here's our ingredients. So we have our blondies here, a little bit stale, as I said. We have these nice chocolate pastilles. Some whole pecan halves. We're going to be using some eggs, some milk, some vanilla, a little bit of cinnamon sugar, and just a pinch of salt. And we're going to make this pretty simple bread pudding. So the first thing we're going to do is toast our pecans. So we're just going to toss those into a pie tin and put them in the toaster oven or oven. And then we're going to crack our eggs into a small bowl just to make sure that we don't get any shell or anything in there before we mix them up. We're just going to give those a little whisk. You can use a whisk or a fork for this. Then we're going to add in our salt. And we're going to add in a little bit of our cinnamon sugar. Now we're going to add all of it in. We're just going to add about a tablespoonful here. Pretty generous tablespoonful. All the amounts are going to be in the description below. We're just going to mix that up together. And you want to make sure that everything's well combined. Then we're going to add in our vanilla, followed pretty closely by our milk. So we're just going to, again, we just want to make sure this is all well mixed. And essentially, we're going to be adding as much milk as we have other ingredients in here. So we're basically doubling it with the amount of milk we're using. There we go. And again, you just want to make sure everything's well combined. There's no bits of egg or clumps of sugar or anything in there that haven't been combined in. And then what we're going to do is get the rest of our mise en place ready. So we're going to chop up these pastilles. We want them about half the size they are here. And it's very, it's whatever your personal preference is. Same with our blondies. We're going to chop these into much smaller pieces. You can see a little bit how dry they are. And we're just going to chop these into fairly small cubes, honestly. We want them to fit pretty well together in our little casserole dish. So we're going to cut them into fingers, and then we're going to cut them into cubes. And that makes them a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to deal with, and we can put those more easily into our casserole dish. Now we're going to give the inside of the dish a little coating of butter, which is going to make it a little easier to get everything out at the end. It's also going to make it, a little bit richer as well. You're going to have that butter frying everything as it cooks, but we also want to just make sure it's a little easier to get out. Now we're going to do this it may seem a little clunky to do it this way, but there's a reason we want to do it this way. So we're going to put in all of the blondie material first. We're not going to be layering it with the other items for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want to make sure there's no extra stuff in there when we add our egg mix, because we want to make sure that it has a chance to soak everything up. We also don't want all of our chocolate pastilles or pecans to sink to the bottom when we add the liquid. So we're just going to start with this and very gently add our egg and milk mixture in here. And you don't want to push around too much because, as I said, we're adding that butter to the casserole to make sure that it doesn't stick. So we want to try not to disturb it as much as possible. So there we go. We have our egg mixture in there, and we're just going to let that soak for a little while. You can see everything's getting pretty damp in there, but we want to make sure that it all soaks up that beautiful mixture before we start mixing in other things. So we got our pecans out of the toaster. And we're also going to cut these in half just to keep everything roughly the same size. So there we go. We have all of our pecans. And now we're going to start adding them in. So this has had a chance to soak for quite some time now. And we're going to start adding in our little ingredients, our little extra things here. So we're going to just sprinkle the top with some of the pecans, and we're going to just take a fork and gently sort of push them in between those nice soaked cubes of the Blondies. Again, you want to be gentle. You don't want to disturb the butter too much on the outside. And we're going to do the same with the chocolate pastilles. And the reason we're doing it this way, again, we don't want it all to sink to the bottom. And we wanted to make sure that those little cubes of Blondies had the chance to soak up more of the mixture. So those are the two reasons that we did it this way. It may seem a little odd to do it that way instead of just layering it, but we're just trying to make sure this works as good as it possibly can. So just give them a little push to make sure that you insinuate them in between those cubes, and then put the rest of the pecans on top as a nice little garnish, and those are going to get nice and toasty on there. So once that is about as, where you want it, it's time to bake this. So we're going to put that onto a baking sheet. It's not going to expand a whole lot, but it will puff up a little bit as it cooks. So we're just going to pop that on a baking sheet to make sure there's no mess, and go into our preheated oven. Now we're going to take a little look here and make sure that everything's going well. So far, so good. You can see it's puffed up quite a bit around the outside, but the inside is still pretty liquidy and dense. So we're going to wait. We're going to put that back in and wait until everything is sort of puffed up a little bit more. Try to make sure it's rotated nicely in there. And then after it's baked for a little while longer, we're going to take another look. And you can see the whole thing now has puffed up rather nicely. The chocolate's all melted. It's boiling a little bit on the outside where that butter is allowed for a little bit of crust on the outside. And that's done. That's perfect. You can see some browning on there. And then you're going to want to wait until that's cooled and set nicely. And then it's if you've done your buttering decently well, it should be not too much trouble to get a nice slice out without tearing it apart. And there you go. That's what it looks like on the inside. You can see nice and moist with that beautiful bread pudding mixture, the eggs and milk. And this is just a super easy way to use up some leftover desserts. Those squares got a little bit stale. They actually freeze very well, so once they come out of the freezer, they're going to be a little bit different texture, but this is a perfect application for those, and is absolutely delicious, so we hope you'll give this a try. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe, and if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.